Back in heavy metal's heyday, a whole lot of strange and outrageous things happened. So in this video, I'll count down the 10 weirdest moments in the genre between the early 1980s and the early 1990s. So get ready for bad casting, greedy managers, headless bats, exploding wardrobes, misguided award shows, unlikely collaborations, and more. At number 10, we have the early hosts of Headbangers Ball, both of whom not metal at all. So the history of MTV's Headbangers Ball really goes back to 1985 when its precursor, Heavy Metal Mania, was on the air for about a year and a half. Most of why original host and Twisted Sister frontman Dee Snider left the show was that MTV wasn't paying him at all. But metal got more popular, and thus the format was revived and renamed Headbangers Ball in 1987. The funny thing is that MTV started out this ostensibly brand new metal video show with its first hosts not even being metal guys. Kevin Seal was a VJ at the network, and he pretty much bounced around through the formats there. He was mostly known for hosting the alternative rock show 120 Minutes, at least for a time, and he was largely viewed as obnoxious and nerdy. He was followed by Adam Curry, who appeared closer to the mark, but had no real metal cred. I mean, he looked like MTV just threw some hairspray on him and tossed a leather jacket on him and hoped metal fans would accept him. By and large, we did not. In fact, it wasn't until 1990 when the show finally got a metal guy in the form of Ricky Rackman, who was actually into metal. He was close friends with metal rock stars, and he ran a club that actually featured hard rock and heavy metal music. So MTV went from a guy they should have paid to keep, to a guy who didn't know what he was doing, to a guy who looked like he'd rather be somewhere else, to finally a guy who actually knew what he was talking about. Of course, MTV got rid of the music in music television altogether and became a reality TV network later, but that's a whole other bag of woe. Coming in at number 9 is the casting of Mark Price as a metalhead in the 1986 horror movie Trick or Treat. So first off, if you haven't seen this movie, you are doing yourself a big disservice because it is classic heavy metal horror schlock. It also has Ozzy Osborne and Gene Simmons in cameo roles, so bit of a bonus there. However, the bad casting in this film is with the main character Ragman, played by Mark Price. As some know, Price was already famous for playing the geeky neighbor kid Skippy on the NBC sitcom Family Ties, and even then felt typecast into that role. So porting him over to an outcast metalhead trying to be edgy and misunderstood was pretty baffling. It was also known that Price got extensions to appear to have more hair, but it just looked like a bad mullet instead. I suppose one could point to the casting of the movie's antagonist, Sammy Kerr, as being a bit misguided, seeing as actor Tony Fields was a solid gold dancer and not exactly a metal guy himself. In fact, Blackie Lawless of Wasp was actually offered the Sammy role first, but declined it. Regardless, Price really is the biggest head scratcher in the casting department here. So many other actors at the time would have clearly fit better. I mean, pick any young dude from River's Edge and you could have been all set. Anyways, yeah, odd casting. At number 8 is the lawsuit filed by Warlock's ex-manager for their name and merchandising rights. The weird part? He won, and the band had to legally change their name. So back in the mid-1980s, Warlock had two managers, one in America and the other, Peter Zimmerman, in Europe, the latter of whom also handled the merchandising for the band. Anyways, Zimmerman decided he didn't want to manage them anymore, so he quit. Then he sent a letter to the band stating that if they sold any Warlock merch with the band name on it, they would have to pay him thousands of dollars. So the ex-manager and the band tried to settle things in court, and the judge gave the band name to the manager. So now Warlock couldn't be Warlock anymore, and Zimmerman could actually sell Warlock-branded merch and then keep all of the money for himself. According to singer and founding member Doro Pesch, he was later not allowed into Germany for some reason. Then he ended up in Turkey, of all places, and thus the band couldn't file a follow-up suit. So the name was considered completely gone at this point. In light of this, their record company suggested using the Doro name going forward to signal to fans that this was more or less the same band. And so they did just that, for a couple of decades. However, the good news is that Pesh eventually regained the rights to the name Warlock in 2011. So all is well now, but what a long way to get there. Coming in at number 7 is the 1984 killing of Hanoi Rocks drummer Razzle by Vince Neil, who practically got away with murder. So yeah, Vince Neil, the guy who these days is better known for his excessive weight and his declining vocal quality. But back in 1984, he was flying high on a major label deal with his band, Motley Crue, raking in the cash, buying fancy houses and cars, screwing chicks, doing blow, the whole 80s rock star thing. But in December of that year, Neil was famous for a whole different reason, when he drunkenly wrecked his Pantera, seriously injuring the 2 occupants of the other car, as well as killing Neil's own passenger, Hanoi Rocks drummer Razzle. The judge in the case sentenced Neil to 30 days in jail and 5 years probation, also to pay $2.6 million in restitution, which he could likely afford at the time, and do 200 hours of community service, whatever that was. However, Neil was paroled after serving only 15 days in jail for good behavior. I don't know. Had this been just 5 years prior, the Hollywood street kid throwaway version of Vince Neil would be rotting in a jail cell for a hell of a lot longer than that. But the lesson here is if you commit vehicular manslaughter under the influence of alcohol, and you're a rock star in your prime, you'll likely get off with some minimal inconveniences. And of course, Neil really didn't learn much in the way of keeping the straight and narrow, as his rap sheet in the 2000s and the 2010s has a whole lot of legal charges on him, including more drunk driving, as well as a string of assault and battery arrests. Misdemeanor, aggravated, you name it. So yeah, good job, Vince. At number 6 is the 1986 exploding codpiece incident of Mr. Blackie Lawless. So at some point, simply wearing a codpiece with a saw blade between his legs just wasn't good enough for then bassist and still frontman of Wasp, Blackie Lawless. In fact, by the time the tour for their 3rd album, Inside the Electric Circus, had kicked off, the band had already jettisoned the severed heads, the tormentor rack, the flinging of raw meat at their audience, and the drinking of fake blood from skulls. The new stage theme became that of the circus, and the saw blade codpiece had been replaced with one that shot fireworks-level smoke, sparks, and actual fire from it. Some say it shot 9 feet out, others say 18 feet, but in either case, pretty impressive. Anyways, on the very first show of the tour in Dublin, Ireland on October 27th, 1986, they tried out this new crotch gadget. Strangely, and unbeknownst to anyone, the changes in altitude and air pressure on their transcontinental flight had somehow compressed the gunpowder in the codpiece. So when the codpiece actually went off live on stage, it actually exploded, and Lawless received serious burns to his legs and ass. Not to mention it knocked him about a half foot off the ground. Blackie even said that the hair burned off his legs never grew back, so I guess he has a lifelong souvenir of that little fiasco. But the tour did go on, and without a repeat of the incident. Though this is the night that gave us the classic Blackie Lawless quote, "If we wrote better songs, I wouldn't have to do stuff like this." So there it is. Coming in at number 5 is the Born to Raise Hell single, featuring Lemmy of Motorhead, Ice-T, and that singer from Ugly Kid Joe. So the original recording of this song can be found on Motorhead's 1993 album Bastards, but that's not this version. Rather, the re-recorded version, which also showed up on the Airheads soundtrack from 1994, is the one that features rapper Ice-T, as well as Ugly Kid Joe singer Whitfield Crane. The single came out on CD as well as a special 12-inch picture disc with the 3 musicians pictured on it. And if that's not strange enough of a combination, the track also has additional backing vocals from ex-Hanoi Rocks vocalist Michael Monroe. And oddly enough, it pretty much works as an ensemble, though Ice-T does stick out like a sore thumb to some degree. So how did this all happen? Well, simple enough. Rip Magazine editor Long Friend was also the music supervisor on the film, as well as producer of the soundtrack. He pushed for the inclusion of the song and also for Ice-T and Whitfield Crane to be on it, since they were both really big Lemmy fans. So a Born to Raise Hell single featuring Lemmy of Motorhead, Ice-T, and that singer from Ugly Kid Joe. So yeah, a weird combination of musicians make an unexpectedly decent single completely out of nowhere. But if you're a fan of Airheads, it's such a part of the movie that you almost wouldn't want it any other way. At number 4 is Metallica losing the Best Hard Rock / Heavy Metal Recording Grammy to Jethro Tull. So it's February 22nd, 1989, and the Grammy Awards are introducing the new category, Best Hard Rock / Heavy Metal Recording. The nominees were AC/DC, Jane's Addiction, Iggy Pop, Metallica, and strangely enough, progressive folk rock act Jethro Tull. Most everyone, including members of Metallica and Jethro Tull, were convinced that Metallica would easily win the award. Tull's record label even told them not to bother showing up because even they believed Metallica would definitely get this one. But when hosts Alice Cooper and Lita Ford announced the winner, you could actually hear the laughter, the boos, and the gasps from the audience like it was a joke. But it wasn't. Jethro Tull had just won the first metal Grammy in history. Still amazing. But maybe that had more to do with the aging and out-of-touch Academy members who made the choices for this one than anything else. Even at the end of the 80s, there were still a lot of folks who just didn't get metal at all, or likely didn't want to lend it any credibility. I definitely remember that attitude very, very well. Funny enough, Metallica did win the Best Metal Performance Grammy in 1992 for the Black Album, to whom they thanked Jethro Tull for not putting out an album that year. Coming in at number 3 is Ozzy Osborne biting the head off an actual bat. So yes, Ozzy did snort ants, and he did piss on the Alamo, and we all know the Dove story. But as far as the Prince of Darkness biting off more than he could chew, so to speak, not much compared to the bat incident. So the date was January 20th, 1982, and Ozzy was on tour in support of his second solo album, Diary of a Madman. This was also mere weeks before his guitarist Randy Rhoads would die in a horrific plane crash. Anyways, the band was performing in Des Moines, Iowa, and one of the attendees, a teenager named Mark Neal, had already planned on bringing a bat to the show in hopes of throwing it on stage. Neal also stated that the bat was 2 weeks dead and had been kept in the freezer until the show. Great planning, I guess. When Neal tossed the animal onto the stage, bassist Rudy Sarzo motioned to Ozzy about the bat, and thinking it was made of rubber, Ozzy bit the head off it, which according to Osborne tasted very salty. Because of the incident, Ozzy had to get 3 weeks of rabies shots while on the road, which he said were not fun. But over time, Osborne did find the humor in it, and if you go over to his official web store online, you can buy yourself a plush bat toy with a detachable head. Hilarious. At number 2 is Cold Lake. Yep, just Cold Lake. But for those who don't know the story, Celtic Frost was well known for experimenting with their sound from album to album, though usually keeping things in their own brand of extreme avant-garde metal. But in 1988, they released their Cold Lake album, which is comprised of Tom G. Warrior and an entirely new lineup of the band. Gone with the swords and chains and spikes, instead, the band delved into the then popular hair metal thing, replete with hairspray and glammy clothes. Vocals were still raspy, but now also melodic in a kind of nasally way, and the music overall was certainly tame and accessible by comparison. With track names like Seduce Me Tonight, Cherry Orchard, and Dance Sleazy, we were certainly a long ways away from Morbid Tales or to Megatherion. According to Warrior, the bulk of the songwriting was done by guitarist Oliver Amberg, whom, after the release of this album, was promptly fired. It was clear that Warrior soon wanted this album to completely disappear, and during a reissue cycle in 1999, it did just that. Cold Lake was completely omitted from their catalog at that point, making copies of this album on original vinyl something of an inadvertent collector's item. Warrior was quoted as saying that the album was an utter piece of shit and possibly the worst album ever created in heavy music. Of course, Celtic Frost somewhat returned to form 2 years later with their Vanity Nemesis album, albeit also fairly accessible, but few could ever forget the shock and bewilderment that was Cold Lake. And the number one weird moment in classic metal history is, without a doubt, everything in the early 90s Norwegian black metal scene. So it's fair to say that people paid some attention to the second wave of black metal coming out of Norway, but not always for the music. In 1991, we had the shotgun and slit-wrist suicide of Mayhem vocalist Dead, made even more grim by fellow bandmate Euronymous, photographing the body while rearranging a few things. Euronymous also took some of Dead's skull fragments and made necklaces from them to give out to musicians he admired. After that, things ramped up considerably as news of the suicide fueled more interest in the scene. In 1992, we see the rise of arson attacks on at least 50 churches in Norway, with the Swedish black metal kids following suit in 1993. That same year, Euronymous was murdered by Varg Vikernes of the music project Burzum, from which black metal in general gained even more negative attention. Even Faust, drummer for Emperor, got in on the act by killing some random gay guy. Oddly enough, or perhaps not, it seemed all of the chaos and destruction actually put black metal on the map in many ways, and likely this style of music might not have even taken off without all this. Of course, a lot of the insanity of black metal's early days got left behind with the 1990s, but the music genre has grown considerably since then, leaving the former crimes as more of a footnote in its overall music history. So which one of these are your favorites? Or maybe you know weird moments back then that I didn't mention? Let me know all of that and anything else that applies in the comments below. Of course, my channel isn't limited to reporting on scandalous events in metal's past. I mainly cover the subject of metal vinyl collecting here at the Accusation Network, but also classic and modern metal in general. If any of that sounds like something you want to watch, and you've yet to subscribe to my channel, then maybe do that. But also like this video and perhaps share some of my others with a few of your friends. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.